Okay, Genesis chapter 50. I appreciate Nick giving us a summary of his life. All the tragedy he's been through. If you're new with us, we've been studying the Joseph from the Old Testament, the last several chapters of the book of Genesis. And then there's another Joseph in the New Testament. We would see the earthly father of Jesus. This is a different guy. We're looking through his life, as he said, he went through so many tragedy, but yet he finished. One of our taglines is staying faithful in the unexpected. Whatever may have come in your life through this time period, or what's ahead, do we need to live in fear, or we just say, I'm going to be faithful to God no matter what, because he's always faithful to us. And certainly that would be of Joseph. We're going to look at the end of his life, how he finished strong. Now, people think of their end of their lives. What's going to happen in my life? What's this going to be? And something that's become a very popular thing for do is that people come up with a bucket list. So the bucket list was made popular by a movie several years ago by two guys who knew they were terminal or thought they were terminal and things that they needed to do, so they joined up to conquer all those things in their list. It's kind of a fun movie, but how many of you in this room have a bucket list? Oh, about half of you do. The rest of you? Maybe you should, but don't worry about it. It's no big deal. But live day at a time. But those bucket lists are things, this is what I want to do before life is done. I thought it'd be kind of fun to see what different people's bucket lists are. So there are thousands of lists out there. It just amazes me. So just the top of one of them, it says, I want to catch a wave surfing. I want to go dog sledding. I want to ride a zip line. One was, I want to take an airboat across an alligator-infested swamp. I don't know that one. And then the ones you'd expect. I want to go hang gliding. I want to go skydiving out of a plane. That's on mine. I want to eat fire. I don't understand that one. Then it's jump off a cliff. It doesn't say what they're going to jump off to, but they want to jump off the cliff. Ride in a hot air balloon. Walk on hot coals. That'll be the last day that they live, I think. Or one was swim with dolphins. Another swim with sharks. One guy said wrap a snake around my neck. Go figure that one. Hold a monkey, hold a tarantula. You can go see the pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, the Taj Mahal, and of course the Colosseum in Rome. And there's all those lists. I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to see this, experience this. And some of us have a huge list and you're intentionally trying to check those off. Others is like just a dream out there, maybe. But what is it that needs to be accomplished at the end of your life? One of the things we need to stop and recognize is that life is fragile. It can change in a moment's notice. And we think, I've got this many years ahead of me, and we plan it out. And for you students over here, you've got a whole lifetime ahead of you, we would say you need to plan for, but also recognizing it can change today. You know, there's some crazy people out there driving cars, including you and me. And one little mistake can be tragic. And this is not meant to be fearful or building fear, but just want to stop and think about it. Life is fragile. It can change at a moment's notice. All of a sudden you get the call from the doctor and there's that undiagnosed tumor that all of a sudden they show up there. A heart attack. A gentleman in the last hour said his wife was healthy, and Friday night they were sitting there watching TV and she had a heart attack and she died, and totally unexpected. How does this happen? There's some crazy people out there in anger reacting to things, and I can live my life in fear, but also just recognizing life is fragile. It could change at a moment's notice, so we're not guaranteed all these years. But how are we going to live? Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 12 says that no one knows when his hour will come. We can have it all planned out, but it could change in a moment. If you knew today was your last day, what would your last words be? If you knew you had the rest of today and that was it, what were those words that you'd want to make sure you said? What were the phone calls you need to make? What is the things that you need to prepare that this is what is most important? Obviously, I'm not going to take on all those things in my bucket list. All of a sudden, priorities change and say, what is the most important? When I do a funeral, many times people will stand around, especially if it's unexpected, and they'll say, this is what he said last. This is what he did on his last day. This is what she was doing. This is what happened. And we think about, what are those last things? What is the thing that's going to stand out about your life? Genesis chapter 50, we see the end of Joseph. Nick already read verse 20, but that's kind of that one verse summarizes so much when it says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. That was his perspective. All this bad stuff that went on in my life, God was working through it all. He believed in the providence of God that we talked about last week. And then on verse number 22, it says, Joseph stayed in Egypt along with his father's family. That one little phrase covers 50 years. By the time his family gets there, all join in, another 50 years take place before he passes away. And those 50 years is summarized in that one verse. And then we have his final words. What does he say when it comes down to it? Next few verses talk about he gathers his family together, says his great-grandchildren are there and we're sitting on his lap. And then he says this, verse 24. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath to him and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and they embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. And that's the end of Joseph. So what are those last words? What does he say? He reminds them, even though we're here, even though we're doing okay, because at this point, remember, he was working for Pharaoh. They were given this choice piece of land called Goshen. They were living there. They were doing well. They were kind of under his umbrella of prestige. They were favored. Things were good in their life. And many of them could say, life's good here. Why should we go back to that place and become shepherds again? I kind of like this. I've adjusted. I can take on this Egyptian walk. I can do this sort of thing. And life's good here. And he says, but don't forget. Don't forget who we are. And don't forget there was a promise. There was a promise made to great-grandpa Abraham that he said there's going to be a special place for you and your family's going to grow into a great nation. And God told Isaac, my grandpa, and God told dad Jacob, and he says, don't forget the promises of God. And Joseph's saying, and we are going to be obedient. And he's passing that on to his brothers who are still there. He's passing that on to his kids and his grandkids and his great-grandkids, saying, don't forget, God is always with you. And God has a promise and a plan for us. We're going to follow it through. Now, a year ago last summer, in June of 2018, we had a friend come, Jeff Walling, and he preached on this. And some of you may remember his sermon. He talked about the scissor reel of life and how do you summarize it down. And Joseph does this thing about, don't forget to carry my bones back with you. That's a strange phrase. What he's doing is he's saying, this is not home. This is not where we belong. This is temporary. And there's something so much more important than this, and that is the promise of God. And that promise of God is for your life as well. That God's presence is with you, and he has a promise where you're going to be. And sure enough, many, many, many years later, over 300 years later, Moses comes along. The book of Exodus picks up, and the next chapter the next book tells us about the life of Moses. And when they got ready to leave Egypt, it says they took the bones of Joseph with them. And another 45 years later, they finally end up, and Joshua is now going into the land. It says they take the bones of Joseph and they bury them in Shechem. And if you go to Shechem today, and we've done that on some of our trips over there, you can go to a place where here's the tomb reminding them of where Joseph was buried, because they fulfilled the promise. That's how Joseph's life ends. But if we just kind of step back and just kind of summarize this, what is a summary of Joseph's life? Well, first of all, we could say that it did not include any bitterness. His life, when it was all done and over with, he had every reason why. So he could be bitter and be angry. He was betrayed, but he wasn't bitter. He was tempted, but he didn't fall into temptation. He was forgotten, but he didn't turn away from God. His brothers came back, and he had every opportunity to take revenge, but he didn't take the revenge. He had this integrity about him that was there. And too many people go through life, and they become bitter, and they become resentful. They start out life and it's good, it's okay, and then some things happen and you go, this is not how I expected life to end. I thought it was going to go like this, but those things come into you and it's hard, it's difficult. And some young adults, middle-aged, become very cynical. And that's showing you're not handling life very well because you're just spiteful back in how you react to people. You become vengeful and angry. I told you before when I was a young boy in church, there was one older lady. She looked like a grandma. She was old, so she should be a grandma. Grandmas should be sweet and nice, and she was not. She was mean. And I was scared of her, and I thought, I was so confused because I thought, how can you be a grandma but you be mean? Because those two aren't supposed to go together. But they do many times, don't they? We go through life, and you younger people can realize you kind of get hurt a little bit, and you get jaded, and you can react out of that. And that builds over the years, and some of us are getting older in life, and think about it. Let's look in the mirror. You're bitter. You're mean-spirited. And it's not a legacy that you want left about you. Joseph was able to take that. Remember that verse, you intended to harm, but God intended for good? He was able to turn that around, and he was able to give forgiveness. He was able to share it and be able to say that God is working through this. And by the grace of God, I want to live a life that's not full of bitterness and angry. Any of us could choose to become bitter. Abraham was given a promise. He didn't see it fulfilled. Jacob was given a promise. Isaac was given a promise. Even Joseph believed this promise that they're going to end up back at the promised land. He didn't get the answer to the prayer that he wanted, but he believed God was still working and God was faithful, and none of them became bitter. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31 says to us in this room, get rid of all bitterness and rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. He's not saying if, he's saying when. Each of us experience these feelings. He said, you get rid of those. And how do you do it? He says, you be kind and compassionate one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. How do you get rid of the bitterness? You remember, we just had a time of communion. That Jesus came and gave his life for you. You don't deserve his grace. I don't deserve his grace, but he gives you grace anyway out of love. And he says, you take that same grace and you give it to the person who has hurt you. Do they deserve it? No. But you give God's grace and you release them from the debt that you think they owe you. And when you do that, God's love flows through you, and the bitterness that is creeping in is erased away because God's love and God's grace is what now rules your heart. Joseph was able to do that, and it's demonstrated so well. Another thing about Joseph's life, it didn't include bitterness. It also didn't include any success. His pride didn't come over him. He had accomplished so much. He has been at the very bottom, and now he was literally at the very, very top. We don't see him wearing that title in a very strong way. He says, don't you forget about who I am. In fact, he married the daughter of a very influential man, so he was now married into the upper crust of society. He hung around with them. He had that place. But yet when his sons were born, he named them Hebrew names. He wanted them to remember who they were. He wanted them to remember where they came from. He wanted them to remember what was most important in their life. His name that was for them was one that they were to remember, that God was faithful and working through them. He remembered where he was going to be. He did not take his identity and his fame and success. And some of us that get to the place where we're at the bottom, we finally climb hard and we work hard and we are proud of where we're going. And we want people to know our address. We want people to know what we drive. We want people to know the degrees behind our name. We want people to know our bank account. We dress in such a way. We want people to know that image that we have, and we wear that. And when you're dead and gone, is that what people are going to remember about you? Oh, he accomplished all this stuff. Yeah, well, what's after that? You put your pride in all this stuff, and Joseph didn't live that. That wasn't the most important thing for him. 1 Timothy, we see a passage in chapter 6, verse 17. It says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. He's saying, don't put everything in your success, your fame, your accomplishments. Don't let that be your image. Don't think the greatest thing I'm going to give my kids, I'm going to pass down to them, I'm going to use a huge bank account. They're going to do that, because if you are, you're missing the most important thing. He says, don't become arrogant. Don't become prideful in that. Also, we realize that summary of Joseph's life, it did include his family, which is unique. Because his family was so dysfunctional. They were so messed up. There were so many problems. But he still cared for them. He still reached out to them. At the end of his life, it's his brothers he comes in and says, hey, let's talk about this stuff. You think there would be the people he would have ostracized and pushed all the way around you. And maybe you're at a place where you don't have family around you, but there are others around you. And how are you speaking into and building relationships with other people that are there? Joseph's legacy, by the way, lasted generations after him. For hundreds of years, they were talking about it. Remember the promise that they made. Psalms chapter 71 says, since my youth, O God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, till I do what? till I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come. He's saying, as I get older, as I look at life, what is the most important thing? God, I know you're always with me, but I need to make sure I'm passing on your faithfulness to the people around me. That's what's most important, is that people realize my generations are around me. What are you doing to invest in the next generation? The good news about the faithfulness of God. You may be building a nice little comfortable nest egg, but you're missing the boat if that's all you're giving them. What are you passing on to the next generation? We encourage here, get involvement in those younger than you, reaching to, even students, you're reaching into the grade school, you're working with people younger than you, whatever age group there is. What are you doing investing in your children, your grandchildren, the next generation, that what's important in life? And then another one, summary of his life, was certainly it did include his faith. He was a man of faith. Certainly the integrity was there, but he trusted God. Then in that chapter 50, those verses we read, 2 times as he's talking to his family around him, he's about to die, and he says, don't forget, God will come to your aid. He says, don't forget, God is with you. That's the most important lesson you can pass on. God's with you, and God fulfills his promises. And he's going to take us up out of this land. And God is faithful. He believed God was going to fulfill his promises no matter what. He's saying, Egypt, this is not the end of the story. And Hebrews chapter 11 is a chapter in the Bible where it kind of lists some of those old heroes in the faith and gives, they were faithful this way, this way, this way. And it comes down to Joseph. It says this in verse 22, by faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions about his bones. So at the end of his life, he could have said, life's been good, life's been hard. Don't forget about me. Don't forget how I was faithful through all the hard things. Don't forget about my accomplishments in life. He doesn't do that at all. At the end of his life, he says, don't forget God's promises. And someday we're going to go to that promised land. And don't forget, you take me with you when you go, because I believe in it real. He's saying, I'm putting everything into this. The promises of God are real. Tom Rainer wrote a book, and it's called Eating with Elephants. And in that book, he interviewed Billy Graham. And Billy Graham said this, you see, we are not called to be successful. We're called to be faithful. And everything in you wants to be successful, want to accomplish. I do. I want to accomplish things. But are you being faithful all the way through? So one question for you is, what kind of a legacy are you leaving? After you're dead and gone, people think about your life. What legacy is there? What is it that people are going to look at you and what's going to be said about you? Mark Twain wrote a book, and some of those books talk about Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and they made a movie about it. And at one point, the little community thought Tom and Huck had died and perished, and they got together and they were having their funeral. And it's just that fun little clip from that movie. They're there, and everybody's crying and sobbing. And these 2 boys who were so mischievous caused so much problems and havoc for everybody. They're remembering, well, he was good here. He had a good heart. And they're trying to say all the good things about him, and their people are just crying and crying. And then it films back, and they look in the back of the little church building. There's Tom and Huck, who had walked in, and they were just sitting there crying as well. Couldn't believe these people were saying all these great things about him. And of course, then they recognize that they're there and quickly get past this is great, it's a miracle, he's alive. And Aunt Polly wants to come and tan their hides. You remember the reaction there? But if you were able to walk in on your funeral and listen to it, what would be said about you at this point in life? What would be the summary of your life? If you were to take your whole life and summarize it down, what would that summary be? It'd be an interesting thing for you to do today, or maybe this week, or maybe your life group would talk about it. What would one sentence be that would be in your obituary that said, this is what their main life, the main thing about their life was all about? Now, our family, we take pictures. In fact, my wife takes billions of pictures. So many pictures. I'm so thankful that digital came along. It saved me a lot of money. She takes so many pictures because memories are fun. You remember this, these are special, all the stages of kids' life. Memories are there, pictures are good. But if you're pull off the side, and if people are getting around and they're pulling pictures from your life, what kind of pictures they do, and beyond the physical picture, what would people picture about you? What is it about your countenance? What is it about your presence? I think they're not going to care about your car. That's not going to make a difference. Or they're not going to care about whatever there is, but what is it about your life? What summarizes your life? For Joseph, it could have been bitterness. It could have been pride. It could have been all kinds of things. Maybe in your life, you've been through some hard things. Life has not gone the way you thought it would be. And there's heartache and there's difficulty and there's struggles and you're just trying to get through life. And people look at you and they go, oh, I'm so sorry. Your life is so hard. Is that what they see? Because when they looked at Joseph, when he was going through the hard things, they saw a man who was faithful to God. And they saw even in the midst of slavery and imprisonment that God was with him and God's presence was there. We saw him living with faith no matter what. And he passed that on to his children and to his grandchildren. Psalms 100 verse 5, another verse that Nick read earlier, I appreciate. It says, for the Lord is good and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. Joseph's faithfulness was there and it passed on to his next generation. The next generation, it kept coming down, but God's faithfulness is there. So our life begins, it ends, but the faithfulness of God continues. It continues next generation. There's some things I want for my kids and my grandkids, but you know, even if I don't see those come about, God's faithful to them. Even after I'm gone, your faith, be faithful through your life. And as you end your life, we don't know the length of our days. We don't know what's going to be. And sometimes that can make us set back. And maybe you've gotten news that there's not going to be much time left. You get awkward about that. What are you going to do? Remember Psalms 23, verse 4, a verse we know real well. Would you read it with me? It says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be afraid of the end. I don't have to be afraid it's going to go. Now, obviously, there's an unknown, and when we don't know what's going to happen, it becomes awkward. It becomes fearful. But deep within, saying, God is faithful, and God's going to provide. And God's going to provide for me, and God's going to provide for those that are coming after me. And do I trust him in that? Do I say, God is going to be the one there? I want to understand this. So I realize we've thought about this more. If I could understand life and the temporary and then the fear of what's coming after, he says, don't be fearful about that. Don't be afraid of that. It's something we believe God is leading us to next year in 2020. We're going to take the whole year, and as a church, we're going to focus in on what happens after this life. What is eternity all about? We're going to take some time to examine what happens when you die. What happens during that time? What about heaven? Is it real? What is heaven like? And then, of course, that means what is hell like? Because Jesus talked about hell also. What is that like? And how does this work? And what is judgment? And what is grace? And then if we truly believe in eternity and what that concept is, and it is real, then how should that change my perspective? How should that change my priorities? As we go into next year, looking through life, how do I focus on all the stuff of this world and the things I get so fearful and anxiety and worried about? If I put that in the perspective of God's eternity and God's plan for us as followers of Jesus, how does that change? And I believe if we get that right, we don't have this fear about life ending. Because God is faithful. I love my kids and my grandkids. I want the best for them, but realize God loves them even more. And I'm awaiting the return of Jesus, and I'm excited about that. He could come at any moment, and I believe he is going to come. And we're going to see him face to face, but if he tarries longer and I go through death, I don't have to fear that. I can be well. John Quincy Adams, late in his life, someone came to him and asked him how he's doing, and he said this. His reply, John Quincy Adams is well, sir, very well. The house in which he has been living in is dilapidated and old, and he's received word from its maker that he must vacate soon. But John Quincy Adams, he's well, sir, very well. He had a contentment in his life. And I believe as Joseph came to the end of his life, it was content as well. He knew that he had been faithful through it all, no matter what. So another question, what are you giving to those after you? What is it that you're passing down? What is this legacy that you're passing down? What is it that they're going to hold on to you? Egypt was not Joseph's final resting place. He knew it. He said, you take my bones back to you, in a way of saying, I want you to always remember God's promises are real. And he's given us a promise. And for us, there's a promise of eternity. And are you passing that on to your kids? Are you passing that on to the next generation, saying, God's promises are real no matter what? Joseph stayed faithful through all of it, through obscurity, through temptation, through waiting, even through success. He was faithful always. Sometimes we do really well when things are hard, and all of a sudden things go really well, and our pride takes over, and we just kind of walk off and abandon God and the things that we knew were so important. But are you faithful through all of it? Greatest thing you can pass on to others is your faith, demonstrated and lived out, even through all the heartache and difficult parts of life. Life, we'd say, is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And it continues for a long time, and there's struggles, and you get back up, and you keep on going. But are you going to finish this life well? There's some people that work and serve, and they do real well, but they get towards the end of life, all of a sudden that bitterness comes in and takes over, and they become cynical, and they're looking around, and they're judging other people, and they just get this place that's not a good place to be. And they're casting stones and implying life was better when I was doing this. Don't end your life that way. Finish well. Don't stumble across the finish line. I love the metaphor of a relay race. When they're running along and they pass that baton, and the baton is something so important. That how it's passed on is so significant. You can be the fastest runner there is, but if you drop the baton, it's over with. We saw that a few years ago with the USA team. They were the fastest runners, but they didn't hand off the baton well. Now, I don't know what kind of a baton was given to you by your family, by your parents, the people before you. Maybe the baton that they gave you was really bad. Maybe it was one that was like the one handed to Joseph from his family. Dysfunction, hatred, abuse, some horrible things were handed to him. I don't know, maybe your family gave you a baton full of grace and faithful. If they've been given that to you, boy, you'd be thankful to God. But if you were given one like Joseph, then what do you do with this during your run? You just kind of drop it, throw it off the side? Because you're going to run with this, and at some point you're going to hand it off. And I'm assuming if in this room you're trying to follow God, a follower of Jesus, we need to do what the verses said. Get rid of this bitterness and rage and anger and be filled with the grace and the love of God and be faithful all the way to the end. And then we get to that place, are you going to hand it off well? Or maybe you've replaced faith and grace and the providence of God, and you've replaced it with a checking account. You're saying, this is what I'm giving you. And they'd much rather have what God's intended for them. Or maybe you're going to give them a boatload of bitterness and anger and revenge. What a horrible thing that you'd pass that on to the next generation. But think about, what has God put in your hands through his grace and said, you hand it well. Don't stumble, don't trip, don't throw it off to the side, but can you hand this off well to the next generation? Summarizing, we're to live faithfully and finish this life with purpose and with meaning. Faithful in life, whatever it is. If you're at that bottom place of life where Joseph went through the heartache, the bitterness, the things that are going against him, your coworkers have turned against you, all those things, you're at that bottom, then you turn around and you just say, God, I'm going to be faithful no matter what. If you're a place of success, don't let pride take over. Say, I'm going to be faithful to God no matter what. At the beginning of this message, I asked you, if today was your last day, what would be your last words? What would be your last actions? Maybe a phone call that you need to make. What would it be that you would finish well? When you come along, so today's your last day, middle of this week, just give me a funeral. When your family gets together, what are they going to say about you? What are your coworkers going to say about you? What are they going to remember? That when it comes down to life, this was the thing that drove them in their life. And they're going to lift that up. Because we can substitute some other things in there that shouldn't be. We need to decide, how are you going to finish this life? Are you going to finish it with bitterness or with pride? Or are you going to finish it with investing in others around you? And also just being faithful to God no matter what. Father, I'm thankful for the story of Joseph. Thankful for the honesty that's there, and that life has some real pitfalls, some real heartache. But also life can have good. But your presence is there through all of it, no matter what. Father, you know there's some people in this room that are carrying some heavy, heavy burdens. I want to ask that you would move in their heart by the power of the Holy Spirit and give them hope, give them strength, and refresh them through your grace. And Father, there's also people in the room that are doing quite well, and they've taken that and put it with pride. And Father, I pray that you'd remind them that you're the giver of all good, and you're the one that's given them the strength to accomplish. And Father, help us to just evaluate life and think about what is our legacy? What is it that we would pass on? What is the most important thing in our life? And forgive us when we put other things at a priority when it should be you. Thankful that you're always faithful. Father, help us to be faithful to you. I pray that you help us turn some things around and put you in the place where you should be. Father, I pray that each person in this room, no matter if our time is short or long, that each person, God, that we will finish this race well and pass on your grace and love to others. So, Father, I pray that you just speak to us, move us, and work with us now. Help us respond to you. In Jesus, I pray. And so we're going to sing a song.